What's up, guys? I'm DK, and you're watching Pro Wrestling What If, the series where I look at the different what if scenarios as terms of the world that we call professional wrestling. WrestleMania 22, one of the more underrated WrestleManias, especially during the Ruthless Aggression era where they're pumping out banger after banger after banger WrestleManias. Having happened on April 2nd, 2006 at the Allstate Arena in Rosemont, Illinois, or Chicago, Illinois, realistically, which had a lot of great moments, especially Rey Mysterio winning the World Heavyweight Championship in honor of the late great Eddie Guerrero. We could have seen an entirely different card had two events not occurred right before WrestleMania 22. The first one was the unfortunate passing of Eddie Guerrero in November of 2005, and the other being Batista tearing his tricep in January of 2006, forcing him to vacate the World Heavyweight Championship and not compete at WrestleMania 22. So the focus of today's edition of Pro Wrestling What If, we answer the question of what if WrestleMania 22 was booked different. So just like last week's WrestleMania 32 video, I have comprised of a card with a certain order of where matches will go. So we'll start off with the pre-show match, which I didn't even know they had pre-show matches back in this day. I mean, there is Sunday Night Heat, but it wasn't listed as Sunday Night Heat according to Wikipedia, which was an 18-man inter-promotional match. And I think in the real timeline, Viscera had won that match, which I still don't know what WWE's obsession with Viscera was, especially him winning King of the Ring in 95. I actually put it as Boogeyman because I know that was a gimmick that was kind of getting over, and even though he did have a match with Booker T in the real timeline on the main show, I feel like he probably wouldn't have been in the main show had both Batista and Eddie Guerrero been a part of this WrestleMania 22 card. Then the first match of the main show is a tag team match with Carlito and Chris Masters against Kane and the Big Show for the World Tag Team Championships. A match that did happen in the real timeline of WrestleMania 22 and was the first match that happened. Of course, it's the same result. Kane and the Big Show will retain their tag team championships against Carlito and Masters, and they would drop it the following night on Monday Night Raw to the Spirit Squad. The second match would be the same one as the real timeline, that being the Money in the Bank ladder match, but some of the participants are actually different compared to the real timeline. So the participants listed here, we have Booker T, Matt Hardy, Rey Mysterio, Ric Flair, Rob Van Dam, and Shelton Benjamin. It's almost the exact same as the real timeline's Money in the Bank ladder match, but Booker T and Rey Mysterio had replaced Finlay and Bobby Lashley in this match. Booker T, like I kind of mentioned, he had that match with the Boogeyman, which probably wouldn't have happened had Eddie Guerrero and Batista been on this card. And of course, in the real timeline, Rey Mysterio had competed for the World Heavyweight Championship against Randy Orton and Kurt Angle in a triple threat match since he had won the Royal Rumble in Eddie Guerrero's honor. But had Eddie Guerrero not passed away and competed at this Mania, I don't even think that Rey Mysterio still wouldn't really be in the World Championship picture for probably a couple more years to come. And I would keep the result the same, being Rob Van Dam wins the Money in the Bank ladder match, which deservingly so because RVD is so long overdue of having a world championship. He kind of was literally the next guy in line that should win a world title. Next match on the card would be JBL versus Chris Benoit for the United States Championship. Once again, it is another match that had happened in the real timeline of WrestleMania 22, and the result would probably still be the same, where JBL defeats Chris Benoit and become the brand new United States Champion. Match number 4 is another match that happened in the real timeline, and that is Mick Foley versus Edge in the hardcore match. Now, I know a lot of people did wish that Edge would have held the WWE Championship longer and go into WrestleMania 22 as the champion, most likely facing John Cena, but sometimes this is one of those cases where certain events are meant to happen. Imagine a world where this match doesn't happen, because I feel like if you were to mention one moment that happened in the entire WrestleMania 22 card, you most likely would be talking about Edge spearing Mick Foley through the flaming table. So how crazy would WrestleMania 22 have been had we not had this match, which I think a lot of people still say to this day was match of the night at WrestleMania 22. And of course, the result is the same. Edge does win the match after that flaming table spot. I mean, it really elevated the Rated R superstar Edge at this particular point. This next match is actually a brand new match added to this card, and it is Bobby Lashley versus Mark Henry. Now, I think this match would have definitely been intriguing. Both men were a part of the SmackDown brand in the original timeline. Like I mentioned, Bobby Lashley was a part of that Money in the Bank ladder match, but I feel like he was only added to that for the sake of like needing top faces involved in that match. And then Mark Henry in the real timeline had a casket match against The Undertaker at WrestleMania. I feel like Mark Henry was a little bit pushed during this time because he was the one that actually injured Batista on the house show that prevented him from having a match at WrestleMania 22. So I feel like WWE capitalized on that momentum and pushing him as a huge heel because of that incident. But had Batista not been injured, I think literally the match at Royal Rumble where he had the world title match probably was a one-off in that he was not going to be anywhere near that top spot again. So it would have been intriguing to see the world's strongest man against someone that looks like could take out the world's strongest man with Bobby Lashley. And for this match, I would have it as Bobby Lashley defeating Mark Henry. I think it definitely makes sense. Mark Henry already lost in the real timeline, but still I feel like Vince McMahon was really pushing for Bobby Lashley, especially this would have been good momentum going into eventually taking the United States Championship against JBL later on in the year, which did happen. The next match on the card would be Mickie James versus Trish Stratus for the women's title. One of the more talked about women's title matches in WrestleMania history. I mean, they had already built up this story since the end of 2005, so you knew that was going to happen at WrestleMania. The right call was made, and I'm going to keep it the same way. Mickie James does become the brand new women's champion. The next match on the card would be the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels versus Latino Heat Eddie Guerrero. Easily one of the most rumored matches going into WrestleMania 22, since obviously Michaels had that banger match the year prior with Kurt Angle. Now there was talks about having another great interpromotional match, but having different opponents, thus having Eddie Guerrero versus Shawn Michaels, which we had never had prior. So that would have been an amazing first time ever match. In the real timeline, Shawn Michaels ended up having a no-holds-barred street fight against Vince McMahon, which I feel like that match happened because they wanted to have some sort of match for Shawn Michaels since Eddie Guerrero had passed away. This would have been an absolute banger of a match, and especially in a crowd like Chicago for this WrestleMania, would have ate it all up, and this would have been a crazy WrestleMania match that people would have been talking about to this day had it happened. And I think for the result for this, I think Shawn Michaels would go over in this match. I think this time around, since Shawn Michaels had lost to Kurt Angle the year prior, that this time around they would actually give Shawn Michaels the win, but either or I wouldn't care. Eddie Guerrero winning or Shawn Michaels winning, I would have been fine with either result, but I think Shawn Michaels would go over in this match. The next match we have here is Randy Orton versus the Animal Batista for the World Heavyweight Championship. A match that was heavily discussed about for Batista going into WrestleMania 22. It was actually discussed about on an episode of Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard that the original plans were for Randy Orton to possibly win the Royal Rumble so that they can set up basically an Evolution versus Evolution match between Randy Orton and Batista. And of course, we kind of almost had that years later when Batista won the 2014 Royal Rumble and Randy Orton was the WWE World Heavyweight Champion, but of course the Yes Movement had ruined that. As terms to this result, I think for some reason Batista would actually retain the World Heavyweight Championship, and I think it's because around this time Randy Orton kind of had a bad attitude and he was getting suspended for his bad behavior. So I think it would have been the same case here where because of bad behavior they would decide not to pull the trigger on Randy Orton defeating Batista, and that Batista would retain, and thus I guess completing an official 1 year of becoming World Heavyweight Champion, since Batista did win it from Triple H the year prior at WrestleMania 21. The next match on this WrestleMania 22 card would be The Undertaker versus Kurt Angle, a match that we all wish would have happened on this WrestleMania 22 card. We did get it the month prior at No Way Out, and it was easily one of the greatest WWE matches of all time, especially for one of the more, I guess, B-show pay-per-views like No Way Out. And it was even discussed on an episode of the Kurt Angle show, Kurt Angle's podcast, that Kurt Angle even mentioned him and Undertaker pitching this match for WrestleMania 22, but of course in the real timeline, Kurt Angle was the World Heavyweight Champion, and Vince McMahon was contemplating about this match, considering that even though the streak is on the line, he didn't want The Undertaker winning the World Heavyweight Championship around this time, so that match was basically scrapped for WrestleMania and given the month prior at No Way Out. But had it been not for the World Heavyweight title and happened at WrestleMania, would have been one of those all-time classics, right up there with maybe both of the Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels matches as some of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. And the next match would be Torrie Wilson versus Candice Michelle in the Playboy Pillow Fight match. It's still going to be the same result. Torrie Wilson does defeat Candice Michelle, but I guess this is a match to kind of calm down people from what they would have witnessed as an excellent match between The Undertaker and Kurt Angle. And the main event of this show would be Triple H versus John Cena for the WWE Championship, the actual main event of the real timeline. And besides Randy Orton, there was also talks of possibly Triple H winning that year's Royal Rumble match had Eddie Guerrero not passed away, and especially with a little bit of Easter egg hints of how this could have happened is that both Randy Orton and Triple H were a part of the final 3 participants of that match, and part of me thinks that they probably would have had more faith in having Triple H actually win that year's Royal Rumble, so it would have made sense that the Royal Rumble winner main events WrestleMania against the WWE Champion at the time, that being John Cena, and it would still be the same result. John Cena does retain the WWE Championship against Triple H. They were really solidifying at this point that John Cena is the absolute face of the WWE and that he was going to win lots of WrestleMania main events for years to come. And this was indeed a first example of that. But that's going to be the end of this edition of Pro Wrestling What If. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to share it to all your friends. And let me know down below how you think WrestleMania 22 would have been booked different had Eddie Guerrero not passed away and Batista not gotten injured. But thank you for watching and hope to see you guys next time on Pro Wrestling What If.